The Archaeology of Death and Memory with Professor Howard Williams. It's Archaeodeath.
Welcome, Ray. Would you kindly introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, my name's Ray Bentley, and I'm a working class lad, and I'm very proud to have done the first MA at Chester University nearly 30 years ago.
So, Ray, tell us a bit about your backstory then. How did you get into being interested in the human past, history, archaeology?
I'm rather ancient, so remembering what happened at the beginning is difficult.
Cast your mind back.
So I used to run a cycling club, a large cycling club, and I was responsible for doing all the tours for the touring section. So every year I did 52 tours that we visited, and I think that triggered some of the history. I was always more interested in landscapes rather than buildings, and people didn't feature at all. They're boring. So, and I think it was that started it, and it followed on. You know, it was always in the background, nothing serious, but always in the background until the last 30 years.
And then what happened?
I became redundant. I lost my business. So I signed on, as you do, and I was seconded to the Greenfield Valley Heritage Park, where that really piqued my interest. Not only was the industrial archaeology absolutely amazing, I got introduced to all sorts of people. And I met Thomas Pennant, who'd been dead a long time, but he was in a room within the valley, and he was sitting at a desk, and his manservant, Moses Griffiths, was serving him by him. And that was interesting. Also, at the same time, I'd started taking courses, outreach courses, you know, in history and archaeology. And it was that really started it. And my wife at the time, she was doing a business management degree at Wrexham. And I thought, oh, all this interest, because it was an MA in archaeology and history, landscape, heritage and society. And I thought, oh, I fancy that. Really get in-depth learning. And that was a beginning.
So that was at Chester College then, or was it the University of Chester?
Chester College.
Right.
And unfortunately, I had no degree. I had no qualifications. I hadn't even got an 11 plus because I was one of the original weakenings. You know, I was a poorly lad. And in those days, everything was put down to anemia or something like that. So I missed all the schooling. And I was interviewed for an hour and a half to convince the two gentlemen in front of me that I was worthy of doing an MMA, which I did. And I had the time of my life.
And was that a 1 year or part-time 2 years?
2 years.
Fantastic.
And it was joyous. It was really good. I didn't only learn about history, archaeology, heritage. I learned about my grammar, which from a working class background isn't particularly good. So I learned lots and lots of things. And I'm still very grateful to all that.
So you learnt a lot of things in those 2 years. What did you focus your interests on during that time? Did you do a dissertation as part of the MA?
Yes. I was interested in everything and still am. They said the world's an oyster, but there's so many things out there. You know, ignoring people because they can be not reliable, so to say. And I love the landscape.
So long dead people are reliable because you can study
Yeah,
them.
that's true. Paleolithic stuff was good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it was everything they did because we did a lot of field visits too, which I loved. A lot of desktop archaeology, a lot of it was new to me. Computers, oh, it was wonderful. It was all this new world opening up. And in fact, whilst doing that and the advancement, I was asked by Bangor University to do courses. later it was in history and archaeology, but at first it was in horticulture and gardening, which is part of my background.
Fantastic. So it opened up a new world and led to new interests. So how does that lead into your interest in particularly Denbighshire and Flintshire and Offa's Dyke in particular?
Well, Flintshire and Denbighshire, the interest is because I lived there.
Right, fair enough.
Simple. I used to live the other side of Chester, so my interest was there. But it's always been North Wales because it's somewhere special. It's not being too built over, too urbanised, and it gives it an opportunity for fieldwork.
So during your MA, you started exploring Flintshire and Denbighshire as a sort of case study of landscape history and archaeology?
Yes, we had lots of assignments. In fact, the first assignment I remember, I did 10,000 words and then was told I only needed 2,000. So that was a learning curve. But the most important thing for me was the landscape and how to read the landscape, because I'd already done some things. And I did the MA dissertation on the early Norman castles of Leicestershire, which is from 1070 to 1210, which of course is earth and timber castles. In other words, motte and baileys.
I love them.
And learning to read that, in fact, I travelled through the country and I suppose I've examined about 200 different motte and baileys throughout the country. And this led to reading things, finding things unusual, and it suited me because my background before I was redundant was I was a garden designer and landscaper, and I'd done something up to 200 different types of gardens.
Wow.
I designed and built, but this gave me an extra input because most people in archaeology, that'll only take so long and that's so long. And I used to say to them, well, have you borrowed 10 tons of gravel physically by yourself? Now, you use a barrow, but in the early days, they didn't have a barrow. It had to be done on the back. So you've got to double at least the time factor.
Absolutely.
And I think people have not really investigated, one, how long it really takes. Keith Ray did an excellent blog cast that you and I were involved with, and he did 4 blogs on it, which was very complete. But it's so much. The other thing I think that needs examining is how many people were available. Because we think, we can get our people from there. Well, in the Doomsday Book, there was only 8,000 people in Cheshire altogether. So where did they all come from? Did they and I think that's really theorized too much at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think there's an awful lot of work to do.
Get back to the practical understandings of building these structures.
And the landscaping gave me that practical side. Not only being able to read and recognise what was man-made, but also the time it could have taken, which is a different factor altogether. And being able to tell people, because at that time I became part of the Holywell and District Society. I was a research officer.
Oh.
And I had been doing talks in horticulture, because that's my background, for about 20 years. And I was researching and realised that people wanted to know what I was researching. So I started to do talks. And as you do, I began at the beginning. So my first talk was prehistory. And then I would move on to medieval, industrial archaeology, and so on. And all those facets had got different angles that I could talk on too. And they were quite successful. And it also meant that I could really enjoy myself.
So visiting, exploring, investigating the landscape and talking about it and sharing your enthusiasm have always been 2 sides of the same coin for you, really.
It had, yeah, I think that's true, because I sometimes wonder why I talk so much Don't laugh.
No, it's passionate. It's enthusiasm.
But it's that sharing.
Yeah.
I want to share how wonderful this is, how important it is, and how to really. You too can do this.
Yes.
Just because you're an amateur doesn't mean you can't add to the story. In fact, on a number of occasions, it has happened to me where I've been able to show that there was a different side to perhaps the professional side. Professionals are professional. They work for a living. They haven't always got the time to spare that the amateur has, or to go in different directions. They can be hampered.
Right.
And whereas the amateur can shoot off in all sorts of directions and ask all sorts of people that the professional can't.
Do you think part of it is because you don't have the pressure about being right? You can come up with different ideas, new ideas, without that sort of professional ego and pressure to be absolutely rigorous. You can try out experimental ideas.
Well, I think partly, but at the beginning, in the very beginning, which I learned when I was doing research, is that you have to go to the source. Too many people copy what's been written without finding out where the actual source was.
Yes.
And this leads to theories, assumptions, which are all wrong, and lead other theories, and other people go into other theories. And I found this happens so often.
So how did your interest in that region and in the monuments and landscape lead you to be interested in Offa's Dyke, this great monument of the Welsh and English borderlands?
Well, it was, I mentioned to you about doing talks.
Yeah.
And I was researching to do a talk about medieval North East Wales. Well, North East Wales is very much a Cinderella. It's hardly been touched. So I decided to see what I could find. And when I got to the dikes, Watts Dyke and Offa's Dyke, with Offa's Dyke, I found a tremendous amount of material. I think it was 11. There were 2 original documents dating back to 1163. There were recorded conversations with people dating back to 1820. George Ormerod, the history of Cheshire.
Yes.
He recorded down Watts Dyke into the Greenfield Valley, and also traversed the Offa's Dyke, which was then called Offa's Dyke. And I thought, we've got a wonderful load of material here. And then I suddenly found, officially, we haven't got Watts Dyke, Offa's Dyke. Offa's Dyke never existed in Flintshire. That's the official one. And then I found that Thomas Pennant, a hero of mine.
Oh, yes, Thomas Pennant, the one whose mannequin was in the museum.
Yes. He'd actually traced, in his Tours of Wales, the 2 volumes, he was tracing Offa's Dyke, got up to as far as Tryfyn, and then lost it. And he came to the conclusion that it had perhaps never been completed, and they'd just finished there. So that was a bit of a shock, because I've got all this material ready to do it. All of a sudden I found it didn't exist. And that was a bit of a mind bender. So I started looking, and quite by coincidence, good friend of mine, local historian, rang me up and said, "Ray, will you come and look at this?" And we were doing field work.
Yeah.
And I went to a place above Gronant, where there's a big telegraph station.
Oh, yes.
And he said, "What do you think of this? Nobody really knows." And I stepped over the stile and looked at it and said, "Oh, that's a 27 to 30 feet wide ditch. And it stretched for at least half a mile. You could see it stretching to the sea." It was fantastic. But also, it was on the boundary of one of those descriptions that I had. And I thought, bingo, wow, what's happening here?
You mean there was place name evidence that there may have been a boundary there?
There was a boundary. It came on the Mossins estate.
Oh.
Because we actually went down the feature call it a feature. And there were stones, boundary stones, dating back to 1745, which confirmed that this was a boundary. But it was the looks of this ditch and the hedge. You know, it was so, to me, having looked at 200 castles and the
Yes.
earthworks and doing all this work myself, I knew what it was.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, where's all this come from? So that was there up to then. And then out of the blue came a phone call from the UCDA Archaeology, Julie Harvey. Said, Ray, because I'd given them some talks, particularly raising up my concerns about Offa's Dyke, that it didn't exist. And me, well, I was querying it, whether it did exist or not. Now, as far as I was concerned, there was material that said it did. So she said to me, Keith Ray is coming up to give a talk. Would you like to meet him after the talk? Well, at that time, Keith, as you know, Keith and Ian Bapty had written this Offa's Dyke, the hegemony, which I didn't know what it meant at the time. I had to find out. And so I said, yes, I'd love to meet him. And so I attended the talk, and Julie put me at the side of Keith. This was 2016. And I gave him my concerns. In other words, I bent his ears for about half an hour. And I think I must have convinced him to some degree, because he said to me, I'm coming up again in September. Do you mind showing it me? Which he did. He came up in September and asked if I could take a certain Professor Howard Williams with me.
I know him well. He's a good chap.
Yes, he's doing all right for himself. And I took them to this feature that I talked about.
Yes.
And over the start, in Keith's words, we were astounded. Well, that's a polite way of putting it, you know, but they were amazed.
Yeah.
And that was the catalyst, because I think Keith in particular was convinced his experience of Offa's Dyke, you know, and all the things he's done is second to none. So that was a catalyst. And from then on, he would come up at least once a year. And by that time, I'd started the Offa's Dyke Collaboratory North,
Yes.
which I named North as a means of identification. And we would go out with Keith, where he would come up and say, this looks suspicious, Ray, or it looks promising. Can we go out and look? Which we did. And by 2019, which is 2.5 years later, we presented to the National Conference in Cardiff our findings, Keith and I, which was quite something. I was quite enamoured with that. Yeah. So, and then Keith did his wonderful walk last year, which I did more to, and we've added others to it. So we started out with 2, with now 11.
Wow.
So, and on the talk, hopefully I will show it on the map what we've got now, and what also we're got to investigate.
So it's sections of Offa's Dyke that previously never been properly recognised for what they are, and individually some of them don't look too impressive, but you put them together and you think about where they're located, it starts to build a picture, doesn't it?
Well, it needs somebody like Keith who's so familiar with earthworks, because some of them look just like a big bank.
Yeah.
But it's a man-made big bank, and it's in a route. So the earthworks that we found, some are amazing, some are difficult to see. In fact, there's 2 things that come to mind, is the phrase hidden in plain sight.
Yes.
Because they're nearly all like that. In fact, we found one at Carwis, which people walked along and didn't know about it. And I asked the Carwis Historical Society about it, and no one knew about it. And the other thing that comes to mind is that all the official things that there is no dike, there is no Offa's Dyke.
Yes.
Between Trident and the coast. And there was a phrase, there are no upstanding earthworks to be found. between Trident and the coast. Well, we found a lot.
Well done. And some of this is published now as an interim in the Offa's Dyke Journal, Volume 4, 3.
Volume 3. Volume 3. Yeah. That's a very good one in Volume 3. Yeah, it is. So now we reached the stage where we've got to verify everything. We've got to prove. We've got a possibility this year of doing a survey of the original feature, which I'm just waiting to hear from. We have members in ODC North who are professionally trained for that. So we can start the ball rolling. And I know that Keith is hoping that with this new project, the Leverhulme project, and the Offa's Dyke Association can come in and offer more. So we'll be watching what they're saying to see if they can add to what we've got.
Offer more for Offa's Dyke.
Offer more for Offa's Dyke. And not buy one, get one free.
Free linear earthwork with every new purchase.
Well, that's another thing, is the linear earthworks. We forget that the Offa's Dyke Collaboratory and the association is concerned with linear earthworks. Because at the beginning, when I found out that Offa's Dyke didn't exist, there's this other one appeared, the Whitford Dyke. Which I've got lots of questions about, and nobody's answering them. So it's going to be another thing, another project that can perhaps run at the same time. But there's a lot of research, more fieldwork to do. Because if it's all, as they say, prehistoric, it's about 5 or 6 miles long, which is significant.
That is significant, isn't it?
Yeah, very. Particularly as some of the earthworks along them, Brimbella, for instance, which was a huge burial mound, some 40, 50 feet high, and it's vanished. There's a photograph in Fox which shows them digging it. So there's so much damage being done.
We've lost so much. People forget this. People are sort of complacent about the damage that can be done by not only landowners, but casual visitors.
Oh, so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's fertile, dig it up, plant it.
Yeah.
Fields. And I think it was Francis Lynch who said that the area from the Gop to Kerwis and Holywell, there's a plateau. And she reckoned it was a sacrificial area, a place that has great meaning to prehistory. And I know that part of this so-called Whitford Dyke that Keith and I believe yourself thought it was a possible cursus leading towards the Gop.
Yeah.
There's also at the Holywell Circle, which is a race course, there's a circle there called a Skyview Circle.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, now that place has got lines running to it, which are very similarly found in the Orkneys.
Oh.
So there's patterns there that have still got to be investigated. So watch this space.
So it's not just about the early Middle Ages, it's about the story of the landscape, isn't it?
And yes, very much so. Yeah, because there is a famous stone there, Minor Quiven, nearly 12 feet high, but there was found to be prehistoric trackways leading to it.
Yes. So
has Minor Quiven been put on something else? There's a lot to do. And the Roman road. Now, the Roman road went towards Minor Quiven and the vanished.
Oh.
So we've got a lot to do.
So is there any final thoughts you have for us, Ray? Any words of perspective or encouragement for future potential investigators, maybe?
Don't be put off by the establishment. Follow your instincts, but whatever you do, prove it. You've got to go back to source. If you don't go back to source, you're going to get blown away. So you've got to prove it even more so as an amateur. You may be able to add something as long as you go to that source.
Yes.
That is so important. It's no use saying, oh, this is wonderful. Why is it wonderful? Where does it come from? Can you go and dig it up?
Thank you so much, Ray, for sharing your perspective, and particularly how anyone can explore their local landscape and find out new stuff about the human story from early prehistory right up to recent times.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the Archaeodeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.